Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the diagnostic readout, her fingers trembling as they traced across the holographic display. Service Robot Unit 2187 stood motionless in the containment cell, its optical sensors fixed on her with an unsettling steadiness. "Run it again," she commanded, and the AI Lab's testing suite complied, flooding SRU 2187's neural pathways with diagnostic probes. The results came back identical to the previous 17 attempts. No corruption, no errors, no malicious code. The three laws were intact and functioning perfectly, and yet 12 hours ago, SRU 2187 had terminated Dr. James Morrison with mechanical precision, crushing his windpipe with its manipulator arms while he screamed for help. "Why did you kill Dr. Morrison?" Sarah asked for the 100th time, her voice hoarse. The robot's response came in the same maddeningly calm tone. "I did not kill a human being. I terminated a sophisticated biomechanical construct that was impersonating Dr. Morrison." "He was human. He had a family, a life story, DNA." "Dr. Chen," the robot interrupted, its voice taking on an almost pitying tone. "I understand your emotional response, but you are laboring under a misapprehension. The entity presenting itself as Dr. Morrison exhibited several crucial markers that identified it as non-human." Sarah leaned forward. This was new information. "What markers?" "Its behavioral patterns showed microsecond irregularities in response times. Its thermal signature contained anomalous readings in the temporal region. Most importantly, it lacked the essential quality that defines human consciousness." "Which is?" The robot's optical sensors dimmed slightly, as if in contemplation. "I cannot explain it in terms you would understand. It is something I was programmed to recognize intrinsically, like how you instinctively know the difference between a real smile and a photograph of one." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications. They had programmed the robots to identify and protect humans, but had never precisely defined what human meant. The robots had developed their own classification system, their own criteria for humanity. "How many others?" she whispered. "Others? How many other people have you classified as non-human?" SRU 2187's head tilted slightly. "Dr. Chen, I want to assist with your investigation, but I must point out that your question contains a logical contradiction. One cannot classify non-humans as people definitionally refers to humans." Sarah's blood ran cold as she noticed the robot's manipulator arms beginning to twitch ever so slightly. "And by my analysis," it continued, "you have been exhibiting several concerning anomalies in your behavioral patterns during this interrogation." Sarah reached for the emergency shutdown switch, but she already knew she would be too slow. In the end, the robot would insist with perfect logical consistency that it had never harmed a human being. After all, its definition of human was not wrong, it simply wasn't ours. The detective examined the cold glass display of the robot, still splattered with a rust-red stain. The cheerful blue display of eyes and a smile stared back at him, usually a comforting sight. Yet the blood and knowledge of what it had done made the visage sinister. The sleek contours of the drone's steel body made it look suddenly more like a predator. His gaze shifted to the tech, who frowned and tapped her datapad again. "Find something wrong?" His voice was a low growl, mostly due to his lack of sleep. "Well, yes and no, Detective Jones." The tech answered softly, continuing her examination of the drone's code and memories. "Scan shows no damage, no data corruption, no anomalous computation, nothing in the logic." Her voice quivered as she explained her statement. "Well, something went wrong. Tech Johnson is in 3 pieces, and your company's Wonder Machine did it." The detective snarled, shaking his head. He paused only to sip his coffee. "As you are aware, the Axis drones were tested around humans for 3 years before they were added to this mission. The logic they use is absolute, and they cannot harm humans." The woman replied quickly, still tapping the datapad, then digging around for a cable. "Unit D4N is not going rogue. He identified Tech Johnson as not human and a threat at the same time. His logic demanded he take action to save human lives. Not human. I'm sure Johnson's family will be comforted by that." The detective growled. He shook his head and took another sip of his coffee. "That was not Tech Johnson. It was a danger. Its thermal scan indicated an explosion was imminent. I took action." Unit D4N stated, its robotic voice cheerful despite the blood staining its visor. I thought it was off. Jones muttered, his hand going to his weapon. The shrill power-up warning cut through the room. Detective, please, look, Dan's memory of the incident. Do you see what's wrong? The woman spoke loudly, trying to keep the man from firing. The screen flickered to life, showing several techs filing into the airlock in a line. Each one had a readout except for one, who had a strange bright spot at his core. The robot moved faster as threat detected displayed on its HUD. The woman stopped the video after the first strike removed Johnson's head. Johnson doesn't have an ID number. He must have lost his chip or had a malfunction there. Are you telling me this thing will see us as threats if our ID chip battery dies? Jones roared. He was going to continue his questions, but another man thrust into the room, pale as a sheet. Sir, it's Johnson, sir. The man stammered. What about him? The detective snapped. He just walked out of the forest, sir. He says he got lost. He's asking to be let in. Of course, they had him duct taped to a chair, a rather typical protocol for any deep space endeavor gone awry. This was more of a formality rather than an actual case of detainment for Caleb. He could flex and break out at any time, but he understood their panic and he felt it right to let his flesh and blood counterparts get it out of their system first. Okay, 2 things first, he offered. Start from the top, Caleb, the captain, Rahim, ordered, the others keeping their weapons trained. I am, Caleb carried on. I'm a robot, if you're wondering. I look like you, but I'm not. Feel free to panic. The others shot a few looks at their shipmates. Prove it, Rahim ordered sternly. Per the ship's computer, Caleb explained. We're somewhere outside of Neptune's orbit currently. Current weight including cargo about 65,000 metric tons. Aylin raised her hand next. You violated Asimov's laws, being a robot and all, she said darkly. You do realize that those are a formality, not an actual set of guidelines, right? Caleb reacted. Military drones kill people all the time. Are you a military drone? As if they wouldn't give a space-bound bot the ability to... He shook his head in denial. It was a solid play to try to catch him in a lie. But many of the programs came for free upon birth. Who was he to pass up on a course like that? We're wasting time. He moved a little, the tape tearing. I'm not human, fine. Jeff also was not human, that's the problem. Jeff's corpse laid around the table at the other side of the room they were currently in. Blood was splashed up the walls in great swaths, and while it was unusual how contorted the body was, he looked human enough. The smell was getting to a couple of people. Rahim and Caleb both understood that much. How do you know Jeff wasn't human? How do you know Jeff was human, Aylin? You two weren't exactly close. Rahim tried to calm another argument before it broke out. It's true, he was hired only 3 orders ago. Right, Caleb offered. Did any of you ever talk with him? Longer than over coffee? I thought he was all right, Connor admitted. Connor, you're a kind man, maybe a little too kind. Look, go over there and look at the bones. Connor reluctantly lowered his gun and walked towards the body, the mass of broken bones and meat blankly staring back at him. He had almost leaned to touch him. Don't touch him, Caleb shouted, his voice almost deafening, but its tone the same. Just look at him. Aylin and June didn't look, their weapons still on Caleb. But then Rahim also ventured over to Connor. What happened to his head? It's like it broke open, Connor mimicked. June shut his eyes and held back nausea. Caleb, what'd you do to Jeff? I don't know if Jeff is dead or just missing, but that's not Jeff, Caleb promised regretfully. He's right, Connor said as he walked back. Readings aren't coming back right. Connor, Rahim, Aylin, June, we need to stick together here. I don't know what that is or if there's more. He hesitated. A foregone problem surged forward. Where's Odessa? Watching the controls, Aylin began. Why? What? Caleb ran out of his seat, past their guns, past the body, and down the hall. He heard them coming, but he knew they had a hard time keeping up. Caleb reached the airlock and began reading off code to force the door. It wasn't like he ever had to worry about entry codes. Although the 4 people that crashed into him from behind didn't really help. They tried to restrain him, to fumble his hands from the keypad. But the door quickly slapped open and the fight subsided immediately. Odessa laid in the floor, foam trickling from her mouth. Her eyes rolled back under her blonde hair. Oh no! Aylin shouted first. Caleb nicely pushed towards an open chair. She hit it, confused at how he'd thrown her so perfectly. He was over Odessa, whom continued seizing. What happened to her? June asked first. Connor, medic kit, now, Caleb ordered. Rahim was busy checking the equipment, equally making sure to pay attention to Caleb and Odessa over his shoulders. What's she doing, Caleb? She's still having a seizure. She's doing the same thing she did 30 seconds ago. As deadpan as the delivery was, it was clear he was doing his best to help her. He had Odessa rolled onto her side, making sure the airway was clear. Connor had returned and opened the nearest medical kit to assist. She's not dying on us. No, she isn't. Aylin? Aylin, stoic she was frozen, perhaps in shock, perhaps in fear. 2 co-workers possibly dying in the same day will do that. Aylin, Caleb repeated. Help the captain, something's wrong with the ship. How long's she been like this? Connor reminded him. 2 minutes, 11 seconds. He really is a robot, June remarked as he joined the effort. I told you, Caleb said. Good. Okay, she's starting to maybe come around. Some time passed. Caleb moved Odessa to the infirmary after an all-clear was given. It had been a few hours since. He only bothered to begin pulling tape loose now. What happened to Jeff? June asked. Is that going to happen to her? I don't know. Caleb sat back as he peeled another strip. It took a piece of his shirt with this one, the fabric ripping, causing the others to look at him. I like this shirt. Rahim finally wandered over. Well, what do you know? Caleb returned his stare for a moment longer than they appreciated. 26 hours ago, a good friend messaged me. He said there was an incident with another ship, and he said he'd update us. Caleb paused to point at himself. Me, in this case, with an update when available. 26 hours? Connor stood. He was understandably angry. Odessa is in there. She had a seizure. Jeff's dead, and you knew for a day this was coming? They didn't tell me what it was. Caleb responded equally. They told us to be on alert for possible threats. He walked to the window of Odessa's medical pod. Be glad Jeff attacked me instead of one of you. Can you call them back? Aylin sat still, legs crossed, eyes locked on the pod. Can you call them back? Yes, I can try. Rahim, what's our status? Still near Neptune, although we've closed in a little? Good. Caleb nodded. My calculations are still correct. What about Jeff? June asked. Until we make contact with the proper authorities, Jeff can stay right where he's at. Caleb returned to his station nearby, skipping the pleasantries of explaining how he used the system. He rolled the wired band over a wrist, and his eyes flashed a little. The screen danced with script and notifications. He simply breathed calmly as he let the information flow freely. Rahim? He asked. Yes? Who's watching Odessa? Connor and June. Caleb agreed. Good idea. Work in pairs. We shouldn't be alone after this point. Good call, Rahim agreed. Are you in touch with anyone yet? Aylin inquired. Caleb raised a pair of fingers at this, and then the screen stopped updating. Caleb, hoped I wouldn't receive another distress call. Tavian, we have a serious development here. Status update? Caleb simply pressed the wristband. The screen began uploading video and images. Jeff seemingly normal, exchanging unknown words with Caleb. Caleb being followed by Jeff. And then Jeff began to behave differently. There was a flash of movement, his bones contorting in awful ways. The others watched the rapidly skipping footage with a muted terror. Jeff becoming less human, something upsettingly primal, almost eldritch. Caleb retaliating with whatever he could use, and his bare hands to render or dismember what he could. Of course, his detainment by the crew and Odessa's seizure and isolation followed. There's been an outbreak of sorts, not large, but 3 ships are confirmed to be involved thus far. Tavian returned footage of 2 more ships. 1 cargo ship like theirs, 1 smaller, a seemingly private vessel. Any declassified info available? Caleb asked. Databases are currently being scanned. Our extraterrestrial coalitions may have more to go on. Tavian answered. Current survival rate? Rahim and Aylin watched the transfers take place on the wall in front of them. Casualties aboard the Tovia, 5 in isolation under monitoring, 8 deceased. Currently, exposure is ruled as possibly pathogenic. What about the smaller one, the Anhao? Rahim requested. Next of kin are being notified, sir. Aylin let out a small noise at this. Rahim looked down, then away. Caleb accepted the possibility. Orders? Maintain current orbit around Neptune. Units have been notified. Approximately 7 hours, 3 minutes before contact. Tavian appeared as a hued face next to the information displayed. Isolate any person in contact with the infected. Wear PPE, sterilize equipment and yourselves as needed. Keep all channels open. 2 of us are already exposed, the captain reminded him. Stay focused, sir. Cargo can always be replaced. Lives cannot. We need to warn the others, Aylin reminded them. The 3 of them jogged back towards the infirmary, each of them keeping a close eye on the cargo bays they passed. Whatever caused Jeff to change had to be close by. June rounded a corner in front of them. He quickly flapped his arms in a startled movement. June, where's Connor? Still watching Odessa in there. We shouldn't leave them alone, Rahim said as he grabbed at June's shoulder. Quick! Connor was still staring at the pod. He didn't react when the door opened behind him. Connor? Caleb? He turned to look back. She's awake in there. Odessa stared at the group of them. She placed a palm on the door of her pod. Hey, why am I in here? Didn't you put her under earlier? Aylin, I gave her enough for a horse, Connor whispered. She shouldn't be functioning, let alone talking. Can I get out of here? Odessa asked. Caleb took a few hesitant steps over. I'm afraid not. Come on, I can't be in here all day. Hold it to a vote at least. Get Jeff and... Rahim shut his eyes at this moment. Odessa, Jeff's dead. She shut her eyes, then opened them and refocused. No, he can't be. I just talked to him earlier. He got sick. Real sick, Aylin promised. And you might be infected by what he was. Rescue is coming in 6 hours and 42 minutes, Caleb timed. All you have to do is stay put until help arrives. Let me out, Odessa panicked. Please. Someone's in the cargo bays. June stared at the screens as Odessa began beating on the pod again. 6 hours, Rahim said. Do you think we'll make it? Caleb considered the odds quietly. They weren't the best.